I'm doing Midnight Train to Georgia, Gladys. I'm doing I'm Every Woman, Chaka Khan. No One, Alicia Keys. I Will Survive, Gloria Gaynor. I'm a Survivor, Destiny's Child. Her voice moved through the set list like she was walking through a gallery of other women's anthems. Then, almost casually, she shifted to something smaller, more vulnerable. I don't know what Memphis was like, she once admitted softly. I was so little when I left there. I don't even remember being there. I don't know. It's a very tiny place, from what I saw when I went back to the house where I was born. Aretha Franklin had always looked untouchable from the outside. Unbreakable. Bigger than the machine that tried for decades to market, manage, and contain her. But when her son, Aretha Franklin, finally agreed to sit for a closed-door, off-the-record style industry interview, he opened a door no documentary, no biographer, and no journalist had ever fully walked through. He leaned in, went quiet, and then whispered a single line that rearranged everything people thought they knew about his mother. My mother wasn't fighting fans, he said. She wasn't fighting men. She was fighting 8 women. And none of you ever knew. He refused to list their names at first. All he would say was that they were powerful, respected, almost universally praised in public and, according to him, coldly strategic in private. Women who, he believed, had tried to slow her climb, dull her shine, and bury her legacy long before illness or age ever touched her body. The way he said it, steady, measured, almost relieved, made one thing impossible to ignore. The story people had accepted about Aretha Franklin was never the complete one. There was another version, buried in green rooms, behind stage doors, and under bright television lights. Tonight, we open the file he unlocked. To understand why Aretha Franklin once described Diana Ross as the most dangerous rival his mother ever faced, you have to rewind the tape to the early 1960 seconds, to Detroit, to Motown, and Atlantic Records. Back to a music world where competition wasn't just fierce. It was a quiet war. By 1965, Diana Ross had already been positioned as Motown's rising princess, shielded by Berry Gordy's influence, polished for pop crossover, and relentlessly pushed toward mainstream America. She moved through that system like a chosen star, dressed, framed, and lit for a specific destiny. Aretha Franklin, meanwhile, was still locked into Columbia Records' stiff, unimaginative projects, her brilliance dulled by arrangements that never quite fit. Away from the cameras, she was quietly preparing to break free, head to Atlantic, and finally carve out her own identity on her own terms. The press helped script the battle from the beginning. Magazine covers and radio hosts loved the story. Queen of Motown versus Queen of Soul. A royal duel sold in headlines. Behind those words, musicians who worked with both women said later that you could feel the tension thick in the air whenever their names were mentioned in the same room. But the first fracture between Aretha Franklin and Diana Ross, according to people who were there, did not come from a magazine, an award, or a chart position. It began with a man. In the early summer of 1965, musicians in Detroit quietly started saying that Diana Ross had been spending long nights at Fox Theater rehearsals with a guitarist Aretha had been quietly seeing. His name barely appears in public records. Session musicians' names almost never do, but insiders claimed he had played on several early Motown dates before drifting into Atlantic's orbit. Aretha liked him, they said. She liked the way he talked about chord changes, the way he listened when she hummed a melody under her breath, the way he treated her not as a star but as a working artist. So when a backup singer told her that Diana had begun inviting him to closed rehearsals, striding into the room with that slow, deliberate walk, everyone on the Motown payroll recognized Aretha froze. She didn't storm in. She didn't confront anyone. Instead, she canceled a vocal rehearsal in New York that week and went home early. According to her cousin Brenda, she didn't cry. She just sat and stared at the wall, motionless, as if someone had walked into a room she'd always assumed was locked from the inside. In the black music world of the 1960 seconds, overlapping romances weren't rare. But Diana had a reputation, people said, for marking out territory with surgical precision, and Aretha knew that. Still, none of that compared to what many insiders consider the breaking point, The 16th of March, 1983, the taping of Motown 25. The air inside the Pasadena Civic Auditorium was wired. Every major name in black music seemed to be there. Aretha arrived in a full-length cream gown, hair high, presence heavy enough to shift the energy of a room the second she walked in. Diana Ross, on the other hand, moved through the building like she owned the deed, hugging executives, checking cameras, studying where the house lights fell across her cheekbones. Crew members later said you could feel the static between them before a single camera rolled. During the segment honoring Smokey Robinson, the plan was simple. Aretha would walk in from stage left. Diana would come in from stage right. Clean, balanced. Two legends converging on the same man. But when Aretha stepped toward Smokey, smiling, reaching out, Diana changed the choreography. The footage still exists. Diana's hand sliding onto Smokey's arm, her body turning just enough that her shoulder glides between Aretha and the strongest beam of light, with the effortless control of someone who had rehearsed far more than the song. She didn't push. She didn't touch Aretha. She didn't have to. The message, to anyone who understood diva psychology, read like a headline: "This is my stage, my moment." Aretha's face told the rest. For a split second, her eyes widened, not in shock, but in recognition. This wasn't new. She had seen this pattern before. Diana claiming space. Diana claiming men. Diana claiming the camera as if it were oxygen. And on live television, in front of millions, Aretha did something small but seismic. She stepped back a literal step. It lasted less than a breath. But to those who had lived in that world, that single step was as loud as a shouted declaration of war. Backstage, a Motown staffer later said he heard Aretha murmur under her breath. She waited for the cameras. Dancers from the show claimed that not far away, Diana dismissed the moment with a louder explanation. "The light was wrong. I fixed it." According to people who worked the show, almost no one bought that excuse. That night was the point of no return. The rivalry stopped being something the press invented and became something etched into the brightest spotlight television had ever focused on two black female superstars. Both women understood exactly what had happened. Both understood that only one could stand in the center. People who hovered around the dressing rooms swore they heard Aretha say quietly, "She knows exactly what she's doing." And Diana did. In another NBC television special, crew members later claimed that Ross privately asked the lighting team to soften the left side of the stage, the side where Aretha would be standing. It was a tiny technical note, the kind most viewers would never notice. But to women whose lives revolved around light, angles, and perception, a request like that meant everything. By the mid-1980 seconds, whatever was left of their relationship was gone. Aretha reportedly refused to be seated near Diana at public events. Diana stopped mentioning her name in interviews. Their fan bases spent years arguing over who was the real queen. But behind the front door of Aretha's home, the story was simpler and colder. Diana Ross wasn't just another rival. She was, in Aretha's mind, the one woman who had deliberately tried to shrink her, the one enemy she believed had truly tried to dim the queen. If Diana Ross challenged Aretha's spotlight, Patti LaBelle threatened something far more sacred: her voice. And for Aretha Franklin, a woman whose identity, dignity, and survival were built on the power of her sound that was the definition of war. To understand why the tension between them cut so deep, you have to stand inside the late 1970 seconds. By then, Patti LaBelle wasn't just another powerhouse singer. She was the one black female vocalist people in the industry quietly said could match Aretha, note for note, belt for belt, gospel run for gospel run. Musicians respected them both. But backstage, where people spoke more honestly, everyone knew one unspoken rule. Whenever Aretha walked into a room, the first name she asked about wasn't Diana. It was Patti. The first big fracture came on the 17th of September 1979 at the White House. President Jimmy Carter had invited a lineup of legendary black performers, a night meant to celebrate brilliance, unity, and cultural power. But brilliance, when packed into one room, can collide. During rehearsal, Patti stepped up to the microphone and unleashed a belt so huge it seemed to rattle the lights themselves. It was sharp, fearless, perfectly placed, one of those notes that makes even seasoned musicians look up. According to people who were there, Aretha went still. She watched, gathered her purse without a word, and walked out of rehearsal before it was finished. Those same witnesses claimed they heard her murmur, "I'm not about to let her out-sing me in front of the president." From that moment, the rivalry took on a new temperature. Between 1983 and 1986, the tension between Patti LaBelle and Aretha Franklin reportedly shifted from a fierce professional rivalry into something darker, more personal. It began in the spaces the audience never sees, the green rooms, narrow hallways where singers stretch, dancers joke, and musicians quietly tune their instruments. It was in those cramped backstage corners that a rumor began to crawl through the industry like slow poison. According to whispers passed between dancers and crew, Patti had supposedly told a small group that Aretha depended on painkillers to steady her nerves and hold the long notes. The allegation never appeared in print. No major outlet touched it. It existed only in conversations, low, quick, and repeated just enough to stick. A dancer from Patti's 1984 tour later claimed that Patti made the comment casually while fixing her lipstick, saying, "Ray? She pops pills before she sings. That's why she can hold those notes." Whether she was venting, joking, or deadly serious, no one in that room could say for sure. But in the black music world of the 80 seconds, dancers talked, and those conversations traveled faster than any press release. The story moved first to Detroit, then to New York, then to Los Angeles. Within a year, Aretha had reportedly heard the same rumor from 3 different sources, all insisting Patti was the one who started it. For Aretha, who had grown up in C.L. Franklin's church, the implication that she needed drugs to sing wasn't just an insult. It was a direct attack on her discipline, her faith, and the spiritual foundation of her craft. One member of Aretha's band remembered her slamming a rehearsal room door so hard in 1985 that a cymbal stand toppled over. Another recalled her saying through clenched teeth, "Let her out-scream me if she wants, but she will not say my gift is fake." The rumor was never verified. Patti never publicly addressed it. But once the seed had been planted, the damage was done. For Aretha Franklin, the idea that Patti LaBelle had questioned the purity of her voice wasn't something she could shrug off. It became a wound she carried quietly, a private betrayal that never fully healed. Then came the moment the world saw. VH1 Divas Live, 1998. On stage, cameras captured what looked like a simple interaction. Patti extended her hand toward Aretha with a hopeful smile, an open gesture in front of millions. Aretha turned away. No handshake, no eye contact, just ice. The Queen's refusal went out live, frame by frame, preserved forever. Patti later admitted she was stunned. Aretha never explained. She didn't need to. The silence around that moment said more than any interview ever could. Behind the scenes, the industry adjusted. Other divas began refusing joint performances with them. Producers avoided pairing their names at award shows. Tribute organizers quietly staggered their appearances so they wouldn't have to share a stage. It wasn't a petty feud. It was a seismic fault line running under black music itself. Because in private, Aretha reportedly admitted something almost no one outside her inner circle ever heard. Patti LaBelle was the only singer she truly feared standing beside on a stage. And fear, in the life of a queen, is often the closest thing to hatred. In the industry, people were careful with their words when it came to Aretha Franklin. They watched their tone, lowered their voices, wrapped every opinion in respect. Etta James was the exception. Etta feared no one. She was fire in a leather jacket, a street-raised soul singer who didn't bow to titles, producers, or legends. And in the heavyweight arena of black music, she was one of the only women who ever spoke about Aretha not with reverence, but with raw, unfiltered honesty. Their rivalry wasn't quiet. It was volcanic. According to musicians who toured the Chitlin circuit in the 1960 seconds, the tension between them could be felt before either woman stepped on stage. They claim that in some clubs you could almost tell whose fans were in which corner just by the way the room shifted when one of their names was mentioned. The first public explosion came in 1967, the year Aretha broke through on a global scale with respect. While the world was crowning her an icon, Etta was sitting in a Chicago dressing room, cigarette in hand, talking to a reporter. As the story has been told, she didn't flinch when she said it. She allegedly looked straight ahead and declared that Aretha had stolen some of her style and pretended to be more holy than she really was. It wasn't a clumsy slip. It sounded like a deliberate shot, a declaration of war. Etta believed she represented the gritty, ugly truth of soul pain, violence, addiction, survival in its rawest form, while Aretha, in her view, leaned on her church image, presenting herself as a sanctified queen to keep her good girl aura intact. But the most devastating moment in their feud didn't happen on television or in a magazine. It happened behind a curtain. It was a humid night in June 1974, backstage at the Chicago Auditorium Theater during a multi-artist soul review. It was the kind of lineup where egos and amplifiers both ran into the red. The hallway was narrow, crowded, buzzing. Musicians tuned their guitars in corners. Stagehands rushed heavy equipment past dressing rooms. The air was thick with hairspray, sweat, and cigarette smoke. Aretha had just finished rehearsing Bridge Over Troubled Water. Inside her dressing room, she was calm and measured, adjusting her rings in the mirror, going over the song in her head. Out in the hall, Etta James was pacing like a storm that hadn't found its target yet. People who were there said Etta had just finished arguing with her road manager about her set time. She was already angry heels slamming against the concrete floor, her voice rising every time she complained about being placed after too many slow numbers. A trumpet player named Julius Henderson later described what happened next like a scene he could never forget. Etta wasn't talking, he said. She was hunting. According to his account, Etta walked straight toward Aretha's open dressing room door and stopped just outside of it, staring at the reflection in the mirror. The room was full hairstylist, makeup, wardrobe, but the moment Etta raised her voice, everything else disappeared. Without introduction, without warning, she shouted so loud, the entire backstage went silent. "Aretha been messing with a married preacher. Miss Church Girl, ain't that innocent?" The words hit like a bomb. The hallway froze. A stylist reportedly dropped a comb. A lighting tech fumbled a cable. A backup singer covered her mouth with her hand. It felt, to those watching, like someone had ripped open a locked vault and dragged its contents under fluorescent light. Because in those circles, people had already heard whispers. Throughout the late 1960 seconds and early 1970 seconds, quiet rumors had circulated in the gospel and soul community that Aretha had been romantically involved with a married preacher connected to her father's church circle. It was never printed, never officially documented. It lived in coded conversations between choir mothers, musicians, and pastors' wives, surviving only in whispers. Aretha had spent years, according to those close to her, trying to suffocate those kinds of stories whenever they surfaced. To hear Etta scream, one of them openly, aggressively, in front of musicians and staff, was like having her deepest fears dragged into the open. Aretha did not yell back. She didn't spring from her chair or lunge toward the door. Julius recalled that she went completely rigid, her hand tightening around her own wrist so hard he thought she might bruise herself. Her face didn't twist in rage, it collapsed into something worse. Humiliation. A deep, airless humiliation that seemed to shrink the room around her. Etta stepped closer, not satisfied with the damage already done. As the story has been retold, she leaned in and hissed, "Tell your fans the truth, Sister Franklin. Holy on Sunday, wild by Monday." The words were chosen with precision. Etta knew exactly where to strike. Aretha's entire identity, her origin story, her sound, her pride, was rooted in her father, Reverend C. L. Franklin, one of the most influential preachers in America. Attacking her morality wasn't just a jab at her. It was a direct hit on his legacy and on the church that had shaped her. A security guard finally stepped in, placing an arm between them, guiding Etta away down the hallway. Etta, witnesses said, walked off with a smirk, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like an extra body in the room. Aretha went on stage that night and delivered her performance like the professional she always was. The audience never saw the crack. But people backstage said that afterward, something in her seemed altered, like a pane of glass that looked intact but had been hit hard enough to fracture down the middle. Because that night, Etta James didn't just insult Aretha Franklin. She tore into the one belief Aretha had clung to, even as the industry turned cruel. That no matter how brutal the business became, her character still stood above the noise. Then, years later, came 1989. Etta released her memoir, Rage to Survive. In its pages, she put parts of their feud on record, mocking Aretha's personality, calling her Miss High and Mighty, describing a diva who demanded worship and panicked at the thought of being overshadowed. The book moved through the industry, into bookstores, into tour buses, and dressing rooms. Eventually, it reached Aretha. People close to her said she read it. And she did not forget. From that point on, Aretha reportedly avoided any event where Etta was scheduled to appear. If Etta joined the lineup for a tribute, Aretha pulled out. If Etta walked into a green room, Aretha found another hallway. Fans chose sides. Insiders began referring to Etta, half joking and half admiring, as the only woman who had ever hit Aretha below the belt and kept walking. The truth, as those who watched it unfold told it, was harsh. Out of all her rivals, Etta James was the one who dared to slice at Aretha's private wounds in public. And that, more than any chart battle or vocal duel, was the one thing Aretha Franklin never forgave. Some rivalries are born from jealousy, others are born from betrayal. The friction between Gladys Knight and Aretha Franklin, according to insiders, started from something colder and far more dangerous: the media's hunger to crown a new queen. The early 1970 seconds were a shifting era in black music. Motown polish was taking over, gritty soul from the streets was fading from radio, and younger voices were rising fast. In that climate, Gladys Knight wasn't seen as just another singer. She was viewed as a threat created by timing itself. The spark, people say, came in 1972, when Rolling Stone published a headline that sent a quiet shock through the industry. Gladys Knight, the new queen of soul. Those 5 words cut straight into Aretha's pride. For a woman who had clawed her way through bad contracts, personal chaos, and label indifference to claim that title, the suggestion that she could simply be replaced with a single magazine cover, no less, was almost impossible to accept. From that moment on, every handshake, every shared hallway, every award show interaction between them carried a thin layer of tension. Things escalated in 1977 when Gladys appeared on Soul Train. During the interview segment, she made a remark that, according to crew members, traveled back to Aretha like a lit match. "She's a legend, yes," Gladys reportedly said, "but she can be very difficult to work with." In the black music world, calling someone difficult wasn't just casual shade. It was career-threatening language. Promoters listened, producers listened, award show organizers listened. And Aretha, who was already sensitive to how she was portrayed, felt a subtle shift in how people looked at her. As the 1980 seconds moved in, the stories multiplied. One rumor claimed that Gladys told a small backstage circle that Aretha used her family crises to drag sympathy from the public. Another alleged that Gladys made fun of Aretha's habit of arriving late, brushing it off as queen behavior. No one could say for sure which stories were accurate, but every version, true or twisted, found its way back to Aretha fast and always with a sting. Then came 1994, and a Grammy tribute to soul icons. Producers, sensing ratings gold, tried to pair the two women for a duet that would unite generations on one stage. According to people involved with the show, Gladys declined. Some insiders chalked it up to scheduling, others insisted it was rivalry. Aretha didn't care about the explanation. She took it as an insult either way. After that, she made a quiet rule with her team: "Don't seat me next to Gladys." And the industry responded. Award shows placed them at opposite ends of banquet rooms. Television specials kept their introductions and performance segments separated. Promoters stopped trying to book them on the same bill. The separation became part of the unspoken logistics of black music events. Gladys Knight never launched a public attack on Aretha. She didn't have to. The press, The headlines and the constant comparisons had already cast her in a specific role, the inevitable successor. And for Aretha Franklin, a woman who had built her entire sense of self around being the queen, that was the wound that cut the deepest. Gladys Knight, in Aretha's mind, hadn't simply tried to outshine her. She was the woman the world tried to use to replace her. Mavis Staples, the rival who threatened her gospel bloodline. Before the fame, before the Grammys, before the charts and the word respect became an anthem, Aretha Franklin was a preacher's daughter, a young woman raised in the furnace heat of Detroit's black churches. And in that sacred world, there was only one other musical family whose influence rivaled the Franklins: the Staples. The tension between Aretha Franklin and Mavis Staples did not begin on a television stage. It began in wooden pews and church aisles. It was generational, spiritual, and painfully personal. In the mid-1950 seconds, choir directors and church elders were said to whisper it openly after services. The Franklin girl is gifted, but she's not as anointed as Mavis. Aretha reportedly heard versions of that line more times than she could count. It cut deep, carving itself into her memory and planting a wound that grew sharper as both women rose beyond the church circuit and into national fame. By 1963, at the historic Selma March, that old wound was reopened. Mavis was placed close to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., singing near the inner circle, while Aretha stood further back. It was a small detail on a massive day in history, but to Aretha, it felt like a verdict. She didn't forget. Friends later said she went home in heavy silence that night, repeating one sentence to herself: